Did Meghan Markle really demand £20 million from the royal family to keep certain secrets hidden? You might think that's an exaggeration, a tabloid rumor meant to shock. But what if I told you it came directly from the source, King Charles himself? Imagine being the heir to the throne, living your life under constant scrutiny, only to find out that someone in your inner circle was prepared to leverage your family's reputation for an unimaginable sum of money. How would you feel? Shocked? Betrayed? Infuriated? This isn't some Hollywood script. This is the reality unfolding within the most iconic royal family in the world, and the implications are staggering. It all begins with tension, whispered conversations, and closed doors in Buckingham Palace. The royal family, as polished and pristine as they appear to the public, is no stranger to controversy. Scandals, secret deals, and family disagreements have erupted over centuries, and yet, nothing compares to this revelation. Nothing quite captures the intersection of personal betrayal, global attention, and financial stakes like this. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of one of the most sensational stories of our time. King Charles finally revealing the truth about Meghan Markle and the shocking financial demand that left the palace reeling. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Before we dive deeper, ask yourself this. What motivates someone to risk everything for secrecy? Is it fear, pride, or perhaps a calculated attempt to control a narrative? Meghan Markle's journey through the royal family has been anything but ordinary. From her whirlwind romance with Prince Harry to the intense scrutiny of the British media, her life has been a constant high-stakes performance. Every word, every public appearance, every Instagram post has been dissected by millions. But behind the cameras, away from the glare of public opinion, there's a story few have been told until now. Consider this. When the Queen passed and King Charles ascended to the throne, the expectations placed upon him didn't just multiply. They transformed into an entirely new dimension of responsibility. He inherited centuries of tradition, centuries of public expectation, and centuries of scrutiny. And then Meghan Markle arrived, bringing with her a presence that was as magnetic as it was controversial. Suddenly, the palace corridors that had been predictable for decades were filled with tension, uncertainty, and whispered warnings. Some insiders claimed that the demand for £20 million wasn't merely about money. It was about power, leverage, and control over the narrative that could either make or break reputations. What's particularly fascinating and alarming is how this situation unfolded behind closed doors. Picture the scene. King Charles sitting in a richly adorned room, advisors gathered, papers spread out on the table, and then the bombshell arrives. A letter, discreetly delivered, containing terms that, on the surface, might seem unimaginable, and yet it demanded attention. How could the monarchy, steeped in centuries of tradition and protocol, respond to such an unprecedented challenge? The answer, as we will explore in the coming chapters, is far from simple. There are layers upon layers of complexity, family loyalty versus public duty, financial considerations versus moral obligations, and the delicate dance of maintaining dignity while navigating betrayal. Now, here's where things get even more complicated. The £20 million isn't just a number. It's a symbol of leverage, a symbol of potential scandal, and a symbol of just how high the stakes can climb when secrets are involved. Imagine the conversations that must have taken place. Hushed tones in palace hallways, urgent meetings with lawyers, whispered debates over strategy. Every decision carried weight not only for the immediate parties, but for the entire monarchy. A misstep could ignite a media frenzy, erode public trust, and further fuel the complex web of personal and professional consequences. And speaking of the media, it's impossible to ignore the role it has played in this saga. From the moment Meghan Markle entered royal life, the press has oscillated between fascination and vilification. Headlines scream drama, public opinion shifts in an instant, and every revelation becomes a worldwide event. But here's the crucial point. Much of what we've seen in newspapers or social media is just the tip of the iceberg. The full story, the part that King Charles has finally revealed, is far more intricate, far more devastating, and far more consequential than anything that's been reported. And it's precisely that hidden layer that we're going to explore today. Now, you might be wondering, Why now? Why reveal this truth at this particular moment? The timing is no coincidence. Monarchies are not immune to the pressures of the modern world. Public opinion, social media scrutiny, and internal family dynamics all converge to create situations that demand transparency, even if reluctantly. King Charles, after years of enduring both personal and public trials, decided it was time to address this matter head-on. The revelation is not just about setting the record straight. It's about confronting a betrayal that has reverberated throughout the palace and beyond. And trust me, the ripples of this disclosure are still being felt today. But before we go any further, pause for a moment and consider the human side of this story. We often view royalty through a lens of glamour, wealth, and untouchable privilege. Yet at the core, these are human beings dealing with profoundly human emotions: fear, anger, love, and disappointment. King Charles faced a moral and emotional quandary: protect the institution, safeguard the family, or expose the truth. Meghan Markle, on the other hand, navigated her own complex motivations, balancing personal ambition, public scrutiny, and a desire to protect certain aspects of her life. These conflicting forces set the stage for a dramatic confrontation that, until now, had remained behind closed doors. As we move into the next chapters, prepare to uncover the intricate web of events that led to this shocking revelation. You'll see the palace not just as a historical institution, but as a living, breathing entity filled with tension, tradition, and unexpected vulnerability. You'll witness moments of calculated strategy, emotional outbursts, and decisions that could change the course of history. And most importantly, you'll gain insight into the delicate balance of power, trust, and secrecy that defines life within the royal family. So, what really happened when King Charles received Meghan's demand? How did he react? Who in the palace knew? And what measures were taken behind the scenes to manage this unprecedented situation? And perhaps most importantly, what does this reveal about the character of both King Charles and Meghan Markle? The answers are coming. But first, understand this. Every revelation in this story has a deeper layer, a hidden motive, and a consequence that could shock even the most seasoned observers of royal affairs. But here's the question that will haunt you as we go deeper. What would you do if someone close to you leveraged your secrets for a fortune? Could you forgive? Could you strategize? Or would you feel compelled to confront the betrayal head-on, regardless of the fallout? The answers may surprise you, because in the royal world, nothing is ever black and white. Every decision carries weight far beyond what we, as outsiders, can even imagine. It began as whispers. Quiet conversations in the grand hallways of Buckingham Palace, barely audible over the hum of daily activity. Staff moved briskly, eyes darting to the portraits that lined the walls, each one a reminder of centuries of tradition, power, and duty. But something was different now. Something heavier. Something that would shake the very foundation of the monarchy. The royal family, seemingly untouchable, immaculate, and disciplined, was under siege, and the source of the storm was closer than anyone dared imagine. Imagine being King Charles in that moment. A lifetime of preparation had led to this, an ascension to the throne, a moment meant to symbolize stability and continuity. Yet here he was, confronted with a crisis that was not political, not public, but deeply personal. The palace had survived wars, political scandals, and decades of scrutiny, yet nothing tested its resilience like the internal tension now threatening to explode. And at the center of it all was Meghan Markle. The narrative we've all seen in the media, glamorous photo shoots, carefully curated interviews, dramatic appearances at official events, is only the surface. Behind that polished image was a woman who understood the power of leverage, the value of secrets, and the currency of scandal. And somehow, King Charles found himself in a position where the institution he had devoted his life to protecting was suddenly vulnerable to an unprecedented challenge. But how did it come to this? To understand the present, we must look back at the dynamics within the royal household. The monarchy, for all its grandeur, operates under a rigid hierarchy. Loyalty is demanded, protocol is enforced, and deviations are noted and remembered. Family disputes are often kept behind closed doors, managed quietly to preserve public image. And yet, There are moments when even the most disciplined walls cannot contain personal ambition or resentment. The whispers that began quietly were the first cracks in what would become an unrelenting storm. Palace insiders have described the atmosphere during this time as tense, almost electric. Meetings in dimly lit rooms, advisors pacing nervously, letters being read and reread. Each interaction was a test of patience, judgment, and composure. It was no longer just about public appearances or ceremonial duties. The very reputation of the monarchy was on the line, and every action, every word, carried weight. One wrong move could ignite a media firestorm that would consume years of carefully cultivated image. King Charles faced a dilemma unlike any before. On one side, there was duty, to the crown, to tradition, to the institution that had defined his life. On the other side, there was the personal betrayal, the knowledge that someone within the family, someone he had welcomed, supported, and trusted, might be leveraging intimate knowledge for personal gain. The tension was palpable. Advisors whispered, legal teams prepared contingencies, and the family itself began to feel the strain. The palace, normally a fortress of order, had become a battlefield of secrets, suspicion, and strategy. And yet, the public was largely unaware. To the world, the monarchy continued its usual rhythm: public appearances, state ceremonies, charitable engagements. Cameras captured smiles, handshakes, and polished speeches. But beneath the surface, the palace was grappling with something far more dangerous: the realization that even in an institution steeped in centuries of tradition, nothing is impervious to human ambition. Consider the human element here. King Charles, a man who had spent decades preparing for this role, suddenly had to navigate not just the responsibilities of being a monarch, but the emotional minefield of family betrayal. How do you reconcile love for a family member with the duty to protect an institution? How do you balance compassion with the harsh realities of scandal, exposure, and leverage? These are questions that no handbook can answer, no advisor can fully resolve. They are uniquely human, profoundly personal, and devastatingly consequential. And it wasn't just Charles. The tension reverberated throughout the family. Princes William and Harry, both deeply loyal to their father and grandmother before her passing, found themselves caught between familial allegiance and personal convictions. Every interaction, every conversation, was filtered through layers of suspicion and caution. The palace staff, too, felt the weight of the moment. Loyal servants, aides, and courtiers suddenly had to navigate a landscape where private secrets could no longer remain private. Amid all this, the first tangible evidence of Meghan's leverage began to surface. Letters, meetings, and discreet communications hinted at a demand, a staggering sum of money in exchange for discretion. It was almost unfathomable. £20 million, not as a gift, not as a charitable contribution, but as a price for silence. And yet, those inside the palace knew it was real. The implications were immediate. Not only did it challenge the family's trust, it threatened to create a precedent that could ripple through the institution for generations. If one member could wield secrets in such a manner, what prevented others from attempting the same? The palace's reaction was a mixture of disbelief, strategic calculation, and private heartbreak. Advisors debated the merits of negotiation versus confrontation. Some argued that paying would solve the problem quietly. Others warned that capitulation would embolden further demands, undermine the monarchy's authority, and compromise public trust. The emotional stakes were as high as the financial stakes. King Charles had to weigh not just money, but the legacy of the crown, the integrity of the family, and the perception of millions around the world. And through it all, Meghan Markle remained an enigmatic figure. Publicly, she maintained grace, poise, and an image of calm sophistication. Privately, however, she wielded her influence with precision. Every move was calculated, every communication strategic. To some, it was audacious. To others, it was sheer brilliance. But for King Charles and the palace, it was a challenge that could not be ignored, a storm that had to be weathered with a delicate balance of firmness, diplomacy, and emotional resilience. What makes this moment particularly fascinating is the way it exposes the vulnerabilities of an institution often perceived as untouchable. The monarchy is built on centuries of tradition, protocol, and carefully curated public image. Yet, as the palace confronted Meghan's unprecedented demand, it became clear that no amount of history, prestige, or authority could shield the royal family from the complexities of personal ambition, emotional manipulation, and modern media scrutiny. Even the most disciplined, most carefully orchestrated institution is ultimately composed of humans, and humans are fallible. Now, consider the ripple effect. Every conversation behind closed doors, every carefully managed meeting, every discreet legal consultation, all were designed to contain what could have easily become an uncontrollable scandal. The palace had to respond swiftly yet tactfully, balancing the need to protect the crown with the need to navigate an emotionally charged family conflict. Mistakes could be catastrophic, and the stakes could not have been higher. And yet, despite all precautions, the situation continued to escalate. Rumors leaked, insiders whispered, and the press, ever vigilant, began to sense that something monumental was brewing. The palace found itself under siege, not by external forces or political rivals, but by internal strife, the collision of loyalty, secrecy, and ambition. What began as a quiet challenge behind closed doors quickly transformed into a crisis of historic proportions, one that would test the limits of trust, patience, and strategy within the royal family. Every palace advisor, every staff member, every royal family member understood one crucial truth. This was a turning point. Decisions made in the coming weeks could redefine the monarchy, reshape public perception, and alter relationships that had taken decades to build. The tension was almost unbearable. And just when it seemed that the palace might navigate these treacherous waters with caution and control, a new development emerged, one that would escalate the crisis beyond anything previously imagined. From the moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the global stage, her presence was impossible to ignore. She wasn't just another figure in the endless parade of celebrity news. She was someone who carried a story, a personality, and a vision that demanded attention. For many, she represented a breath of fresh air in the rigid, centuries-old world of the British monarchy. To others, she was an intruder, an outsider daring to navigate and challenge a system steeped in tradition, hierarchy, and unspoken rules. But no matter which side of the debate you fall on, the truth is inescapable. Meghan's rise and her impact on the royal family were profound, transformative, and, ultimately, contentious. To understand the seismic effect she had on Buckingham Palace, one must first examine her journey. Meghan's life before the royal spotlight was far from ordinary, though it might not have suggested the royal drama that awaited her. Born in Los Angeles, raised in a world far removed from palaces and coronations, she built a career in acting, advocacy, and humanitarian work. She had a voice, and more importantly, she knew how to use it. She understood public perception, media narratives, and the delicate art of influence. Yet the leap from Hollywood actress to Duchess of Sussex was more than a career change. It was a collision of worlds, cultures, and expectations that would ultimately test the very foundations of the monarchy. When Meghan met Prince Harry, it was a storybook romance in the making, at least on the surface. The world watched as two very different lives converged, blending royal tradition with modern celebrity culture. But behind the glittering images and well-curated public appearances lay a complex interplay of ambition, strategy, and expectation. Meghan's ascent into the royal family was not just a personal milestone. It was a seismic shift in the palace's dynamic. Suddenly, centuries of protocol faced the challenge of someone unafraid to speak her mind, challenge tradition, and assert her individuality in a space built on conformity. It wasn't long before her presence began to stir unease among certain members of the royal inner circle. Reports, both subtle and overt, began to emerge about the difficulties of integration. Staff whispered about clashes over protocol, wardrobe, and personal habits. Advisors expressed concerns about her influence over Prince Harry and the potential for media exploitation. And through it all, Meghan appeared calculated, poised, and aware, not just of the palace's expectations, but of the power she could wield within its walls. But Meghan's impact was not confined to internal palace politics. She was also a lightning rod for public and media scrutiny. The press, hungry for drama, seized upon every moment. Every appearance, every comment, every perceived slight became fodder for global headlines. Some celebrated her as a modernizing force, a symbol of progress in a centuries-old institution. Others vilified her, painting her as manipulative, ambitious, or even dangerous. This duality created a constant tension, both inside and outside the palace. Meghan's every move was magnified, analyzed, and debated, intensifying the pressure on the family and shaping the narrative that would ultimately influence her legacy. One of the most fascinating aspects of Meghan's rise was her ability to blend vulnerability with calculated strategy. She presented herself as relatable, empathetic, and socially conscious, someone attuned to issues of inequality, human rights, and personal empowerment. Yet beneath this carefully cultivated persona was a keen understanding of leverage. Meghan knew how to navigate influence. It's important to consider the effect Meghan's rise had on the royal family itself. For King Charles, it was both a personal and institutional challenge. Here was a woman who had captured the heart of his son, reshaping family dynamics, public perception, and even the future of the monarchy. For Prince William, Meghan represented a disruption, a shift in the balance of tradition and expectation that had long governed his life. And for Prince Harry, she was a source of inspiration, companionship, and, ultimately, contention. The convergence of these relationships created a perfect storm of emotion, loyalty, and conflict that would ripple throughout the palace. At the same time, Meghan's impact extended beyond relationships to broader institutional concerns. The royal family, long accustomed to maintaining a particular image, faced the challenge of integrating someone who was unapologetically modern, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge protocol. Every public appearance, every charity engagement, and every media interaction became a test of adaptation, strategy, and resilience. For the monarchy, the stakes were enormous. Failure to manage perception could erode public trust, weaken authority, and fuel the very scandals the family had long sought to avoid. One of the lesser-discussed elements of Meghan's influence was her understanding of the power of secrets and discretion. In a world where reputation is everything, the ability to hold, protect, or leverage information is a form of currency. Meghan's awareness of this power, and her willingness to exercise it strategically, created tension within the palace. It is within this context that the £20 million demand gains its full significance. This was not merely a financial negotiation. It was an assertion of influence, a protective measure, and, according to some insiders, a calculated move that forced the monarchy to confront vulnerabilities it had long ignored. And yet, Meghan's rise cannot be understood solely through the lens of conflict. She also brought undeniable charisma, intelligence, and advocacy to the royal stage. Her charitable work, public speeches, and engagement with social causes resonated with millions around the world. She challenged outdated norms, sparked conversations about race, mental health, and gender equality, and positioned herself as a modernizing force within an ancient institution. These achievements, however, existed alongside controversies, misunderstandings, and internal palace friction, creating a complex portrait of a woman whose impact was both celebrated and feared. This duality of admiration and suspicion, influence and controversy, is what ultimately defined Meghan's effect on the royal family. She was not a passive participant in royal life. She was a force that reshaped dynamics, challenged conventions, and prompted unprecedented responses. The palace, steeped in centuries of tradition, was suddenly forced to navigate uncharted territory. Every interaction, every decision, every appearance became a high-stakes negotiation, not just with the public, but within the family itself. Perhaps the most significant consequence of Meghan's rise was the way it set the stage for confrontation. Her understanding of leverage, influence, and the power of secrecy created a situation where personal and institutional interests collided. King Charles, despite decades of experience and preparation, faced a challenge unlike any other. The monarchy's protocols, designed for centuries of orderly succession and public expectation, were suddenly insufficient to address the complexities introduced by Meghan's presence. The £20 million demand was the culmination of these tensions, a stark, undeniable manifestation of the intricate web of power, loyalty, and ambition that had been building since her arrival. But as we will see in the following chapters, the full story is far more intricate than a simple narrative of conflict or financial negotiation. Meghan's rise and impact cannot be reduced to headlines or rumors. It involves strategy, emotion, public perception, and deeply personal choices that reverberated throughout the royal family. The tension between individual agency and institutional expectation, between personal loyalty and duty, between public image and private reality, creates a story that is as compelling as it is unprecedented. So what happened behind the palace walls as Meghan's influence grew? How did her presence reshape family dynamics, spark internal debates, and ultimately contribute to the crisis that would force King Charles to confront her alleged demand? The answers reveal not just the challenges of integrating a modern figure into an ancient institution, but also the vulnerabilities, strategies, and emotional stakes that define the monarchy itself. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, with a sealed envelope delivered to the palace. The kind of envelope that immediately signals seriousness, urgency, and discretion. No fanfare, no announcement, just a simple, formal delivery. But what it contained would ignite one of the most shocking crises in recent royal history. A demand, a figure so staggering, so audacious, that it seemed almost unreal. £20 million. For silence, for discretion, for the assurance that certain secrets the royal family had guarded for generations, would remain hidden from public eyes. The moment King Charles read the contents, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Advisors had gathered, sensing the gravity of the situation, but even seasoned courtiers were taken aback. A sum like £20 million isn't just a negotiation point. It's a seismic event in the delicate ecosystem of the monarchy. To contextualize, consider this. The palace handles vast sums for charities, operations, and estates, but nothing in recent history had demanded personal, private payments on such a scale. And yet, there it was. A clear, explicit demand, tied to the very personal and private matters that Meghan Markle allegedly sought to protect. At first, disbelief dominated. Could this really be happening? Was it a miscommunication, an exaggeration, a misunderstanding? Advisors checked and rechecked the letter. They consulted legal teams, financial officers, and communication specialists. Every word, every line, was scrutinized for intent, implications, and leverage. And as the reality sank in, the true magnitude of the situation became clear. This was not a casual request. This was a calculated move, one designed to create both financial and psychological pressure on the palace. What made the revelation even more explosive was its timing. The monarchy was already navigating a delicate transition. The Queen's recent passing had intensified public scrutiny, shifting focus and expectations squarely onto King Charles. And now, amidst mourning, duty, and public attention, the palace faced an unprecedented internal challenge, a demand from a member of the family that threatened not just finances, but reputation, trust, and control. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Consider the human dimension. King Charles, who had devoted his life to service, duty, and the preservation of the monarchy, now had to confront a situation that blurred personal betrayal with institutional responsibility. The royal family, accustomed to managing scandal discreetly and with careful precision, was suddenly confronted with a dilemma that defied precedent. How do you negotiate with someone who has intimate knowledge of the family's vulnerabilities? How do you protect the crown while addressing the personal affront? And how do you maintain dignity when the eyes of the world are watching, even if they do not yet know the full story? As advisors debated, a picture began to emerge of what this demand really represented. It wasn't simply a financial transaction. It was leverage. It was power. It was a statement that certain truths, carefully guarded for decades, could be monetized, and that someone within the family was willing to do so. The implications were dizzying. If this precedent were acknowledged, if such leverage were allowed to dictate terms, the very structure of trust within the royal family could be undermined. Every past and future member of the household would operate under a new awareness. Knowledge could be weaponized, secrets could be converted into currency, and the boundaries of loyalty could be stretched to breaking points. The public, of course, would never see the private deliberations that followed. But inside Buckingham Palace, the tension was palpable. Meetings were held in closed rooms, often extending late into the night. Advisors spoke in hushed tones, weighing options, predicting outcomes, and considering the potential fallout of every decision. Some advocated for a quiet resolution, a payment or arrangement that would prevent public exposure. Others warned that any concession could embolden further demands, erode authority, and compromise the monarchy's moral standing. The debate wasn't just financial. It was strategic, ethical, and deeply personal. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's position, whether calculated or reactive, added complexity. Reports suggest that she had carefully considered the timing, the optics, and the leverage her position afforded. £20 million was more than just money. It was a symbolic figure, signaling the seriousness of her intent and the stakes involved. It forced the palace to recognize that the conflict was not just about public image, but about private power. And as advisors dug deeper, it became clear that this demand had far-reaching implications, touching everything from family loyalty to media narratives to the very perception of royal authority. Publicly, Meghan maintained her poised, polished image. Every smile, every engagement, every charitable initiative continued as normal. Yet privately, the palace felt the weight of a strategic challenge unlike any in recent memory. The juxtaposition of her public persona and private maneuvering created tension, confusion, and a sense of urgency. How does an institution centuries old respond when the rules it has relied on for generations no longer apply? How do you navigate a crisis that combines personal betrayal, financial stakes, and global attention? And then there was the psychological aspect. Beyond the money and the secrecy, there was the emotional impact on the family. Betrayal is never easy, especially when it comes from someone you trusted, someone your son loved, someone who had been embraced as part of the household. The letter was more than a financial proposition. It was a challenge to authority, a test of loyalty, and a confrontation with vulnerability. King Charles had to manage not just the logistics of the situation, but the emotional fallout for himself, his children, and the advisors who had dedicated their lives to supporting the crown. The palace's deliberations were meticulous. Lawyers analyzed potential contracts, advisors evaluated strategic options, and family members weighed personal and public consequences. Every word of the letter, every potential response, every leak that might reach the media was considered with precision. It was not just a negotiation. It was a high-stakes chess game, where each move could reshape the balance of power within one of the most iconic institutions in the world. Even more striking was the clarity of the message. Meghan Markle was asserting control in a manner that could not be ignored. She had identified vulnerabilities, assessed leverage, and acted decisively. In doing so, she forced the royal family to confront not only the financial implications, but also the broader question of trust, power, and influence within the household. The £20 million figure became a symbol, a flashpoint, and a catalyst for a crisis that would dominate the palace's internal narrative for months. And yet, despite the shock, despite the audacity of the demand, the story was far from over. The palace had to decide how to respond, and in doing so, revealed the intricate dynamics, personal struggles, and institutional pressures that define royal life behind closed doors. Advisors debated options, scenarios were modeled, and the family prepared for potential fallout, all while maintaining the appearance of normalcy to the outside world. The stakes could not have been higher, and the tension inside those palace walls was almost unbearable. But just when it seemed that the situation could be contained, a new factor emerged. An element that would complicate the negotiations, escalate tensions, and ensure that the £20 million revelation was only the beginning of a story that would rock the monarchy to its core. What came next would not only test the resolve of King Charles, but also challenge every assumption about loyalty, secrecy, and the limits of influence within the royal family. The world was watching, and even the most experienced advisors had no way of predicting the consequences of what was about to unfold. The monarchy is an institution built on history, tradition, and the careful management of perception. Every event, every protocol, every word spoken publicly is meticulously curated to maintain an image of stability, dignity, and continuity. Yet beneath the polished surface lies a world few ever glimpse. A world of secrecy, private disputes, and vulnerabilities that, if exposed, could shake the monarchy to its very core. It is in this hidden world that Meghan Markle's alleged demand for £20 million takes on its true significance, not merely as a financial matter, but as a confrontation with secrets the royal family had guarded for generations. Consider the scale of what we're talking about. Over centuries, the royal family has accumulated not only wealth and power, but also private knowledge, personal correspondences, sensitive relationships, confidential agreements, and internal dynamics that remain unseen by the public. This is a family whose every move is observed and dissected, yet whose most intimate dealings are shrouded in secrecy. To demand a substantial sum of money in exchange for discretion is, in essence, an acknowledgement that these secrets are as valuable, or more so, than gold. And in doing so, Meghan challenged the very fabric of what it means to be part of this institution. The first question that arises is, what secrets were at stake? While the full details remain closely guarded, insiders suggest a combination of personal and professional information, ranging from family disputes to sensitive personal matters that could affect public perception. Some of these secrets were mundane, almost trivial, but others carried the potential to cause reputational damage on a massive scale. And in a world where perception is reality, the potential consequences were enormous. King Charles, faced with this reality, had to navigate a minefield of emotional and practical challenges. On one hand, he had to maintain the integrity of the monarchy, protect the family's reputation, and ensure that public trust remained intact. On the other, he was confronted with the deeply personal reality that someone he had welcomed into the family, someone his son loved, someone he had hoped to integrate smoothly into royal life, had positioned himself at a crossroads of influence and leverage. The balance between personal and institutional loyalty became impossible to ignore. What makes this situation even more extraordinary is the nature of the secrets themselves. Unlike political or state matters, these were private affairs. Intimate disputes, confidential communications, and personal vulnerabilities. The monarchy had spent centuries cultivating an image of perfection, discretion, and unassailable dignity. But the reality, as this crisis revealed, is far more human, far more fragile, and far more susceptible to exposure than anyone had anticipated. And Meghan's alleged demand brought all of that fragility into sharp relief. The psychological impact on the royal family cannot be overstated. Imagine knowing that personal correspondence, private feelings, or even mundane family disagreements could be leveraged for millions of pounds. The sense of betrayal, shock, and vulnerability would have been overwhelming. Advisors describe moments of tension, whispered meetings, and late-night discussions aimed at understanding the full scope of what was at stake. The emotional weight was palpable. This was not simply a negotiation of money, but a confrontation with the reality that even centuries of tradition cannot shield a family from internal conflict. It is here that we begin to understand Meghan's strategy. Whether motivated by fear, self-preservation, or ambition, her alleged actions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of leverage. She recognized the value of secrets, the potential influence of private knowledge, and the extraordinary pressure such information could place on the monarchy. In essence, she had identified a vulnerability and positioned herself at the center of it. And in doing so, she forced the royal family to grapple not just with financial decisions, but with questions of trust, control, and loyalty. Yet, for all the drama, the situation also underscores a fundamental truth about institutions like the monarchy. No matter how powerful, structured, or disciplined, they are ultimately composed of humans. Humans make mistakes. Humans form alliances. Humans have ambitions, fears, and desires. And when those human elements intersect with centuries of tradition and protocol, the results can be explosive. Meghan's alleged demand brought these human elements into sharp focus, exposing the tension between the monarchy's public image and its private realities. Another dimension to consider is the role of intermediaries and insiders. Even the most discreet secrets require management, communication, and negotiation. Advisors, courtiers, and staff were suddenly thrust into a complex web of confidentiality, strategic planning, and emotional support. Every step, from reviewing the letter to considering potential responses, required careful thought, coordination, and judgment. And as the palace grappled with the magnitude of the situation, it became increasingly clear that this was more than just a monetary request. It was a confrontation with the very vulnerabilities that have historically been hidden from public view. The secrecy at stake extended beyond personal reputation. The monarchy is a symbolic institution representing continuity, stability, and national identity. Exposure of internal conflict could ripple far beyond the family, affecting public confidence and international perception. Advisors recognized that the situation was not merely an internal dispute. It was a potential public relations crisis of historic proportions. Every potential leak, every rumor, every media speculation carried the risk of amplifying tensions and undermining decades of careful image management. And yet, Meghan's rise had not been accidental. Her understanding of public perception, media dynamics, and personal influence allowed her to navigate this complex environment with precision. She knew that her leverage lay not just in the information itself, but in how the palace would perceive its value, how the media would respond if exposed, and how public opinion could be swayed. The £20 million figure was not arbitrary. It represented the intersection of personal power, institutional vulnerability, and strategic calculation. For King Charles, the revelation of hidden secrets was both a personal blow and an institutional challenge. The monarchy has survived wars, political upheavals, and public scandals, but internal betrayal carries a unique sting. It forces reflection on personal relationships, loyalty. For King Charles, the revelation of hidden secrets was both a personal blow and an institutional challenge. The monarchy has survived wars, political upheavals, and public scandals, but internal betrayal carries a unique sting. It forces reflection on personal relationships, loyalty, and trust. It demands a balance between emotional response and strategic action. And it places the family in a position where every decision has long-term implications, not just for individual members, but for the monarchy as a whole. Consider, for a moment, the psychological calculus required. Every move the palace made in response to Meghan's demand had to weigh potential outcomes. Acquiesce and risk precedent, refuse and risk exposure, negotiate and risk compromise. At the same time, personal feelings, hurt, anger, disappointment, had to be managed alongside institutional responsibilities. The tension was extraordinary, the stakes unprecedented, and the consequences potentially devastating. And yet, even in the face of this challenge, the palace continued to operate with meticulous precision. Protocols were maintained, public appearances continued, and advisors worked tirelessly to manage both internal and external pressures. Behind the scenes, however, every decision was layered with complexity, and every step forward required careful consideration. The monarchy was under siege not by external forces, but by the vulnerabilities inherent in human relationships, leverage, and the delicate balance between public perception and private reality. As the story unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the hidden secrets Meghan allegedly sought to protect were central to understanding the £20 million demand. This was not merely about money. It was about control, influence, and the power to shape narratives. The secrets themselves were valuable because they represented the intersection of personal vulnerability and institutional authority. And in challenging the palace in this way, Meghan forced a reckoning with the very nature of trust, loyalty, and power within the royal family. But the story does not end with the revelation itself. Every secret, every allegation, every hidden truth carries consequences. The palace had to consider not only the immediate impact, but the long-term effects. How would these secrets influence future negotiations, relationships, and public perception? How would the family reconcile internal conflict with the need for continuity, stability, and respect? And crucially, how would King Charles respond, not just as a monarch, but as a father, husband, and human being? The hidden secrets of the royal family, once exposed to the light of negotiation, speculation, and strategic consideration, became more than private matters. They became catalysts for tension, reflection, and unprecedented decision-making. And as the palace prepared to confront these challenges, it was clear that what had begun as a personal demand had transformed into a crisis that would define the modern monarchy. Being king is not just a title. It is a lifetime of responsibility, expectation, and sacrifice. For King Charles, the role had always been defined by duty. Decades spent preparing for the throne, observing protocol, mastering public appearances, and cultivating relationships across nations and within the family. But duty alone cannot shield a man from personal betrayal, from the deep emotional turmoil that arises when someone close challenges your trust and integrity. The emergence of Meghan Markle's alleged £20 million demand forced Charles into a struggle that was as profoundly personal as it was institutional. Imagine the weight on his shoulders. Here was a man who had spent decades navigating political and public pressures, whose life had been one of careful preparation for moments of crisis. And yet, no training could have prepared him for the emotional complexity of this situation. It was not merely a financial question or a legal issue. It was a confrontation with human vulnerability. A trusted member of his family, someone who had become central to his son's life, was using secrets as leverage. The realization struck at the heart of everything he had worked for: family, loyalty, and the integrity of the monarchy itself. Charles's personal struggle was multi-layered. On one hand, he had to maintain composure, dignity, and the appearance of control. Every public appearance, every speech, every gesture was scrutinized not just by the world, but by the family he sought to protect. On the other hand, he was navigating a deeply personal betrayal. Emotions that are difficult to admit, anger, hurt, disappointment, were amplified by the knowledge that the world would never fully understand the private dimensions of his ordeal. The tension between duty and emotion became a central element of his daily life, a balancing act with no easy resolution. Part of the struggle was generational. Charles had been raised in an era where the monarchy valued restraint, tradition, and deference to protocol above all else. Emotional displays were rare, private matters were kept secret, and conflicts were resolved internally. Meghan's actions, perceived by some as audacious, by others as strategic, challenged this very approach. Suddenly, the rules that had governed his life were no longer sufficient. He faced a dilemma that tested not only his judgment as king, but his identity as a father, as a man, and as the custodian of an institution that had survived centuries precisely because it maintained control over private affairs. The personal dimension was intertwined with the familial. Prince Harry, deeply loyal to Meghan, was caught between devotion to his wife and allegiance to his father. Every conversation, every family meeting, every private interaction became fraught with tension. Charles had to navigate these relationships carefully, balancing love and authority, empathy, and discipline. How do you address a conflict when emotions run as high as institutional stakes? How do you act decisively without alienating the very people you seek to protect? These were questions with no easy answers. The stress was compounded by the public eye. The monarchy exists in a delicate balance between privacy and exposure, tradition and modern scrutiny. Every misstep, every emotional reveal, could ignite media speculation and public debate. Charles understood that any sign of weakness could be magnified, criticized, and weaponized by those outside the palace. Yet, paradoxically, he also recognized that private deliberation and strategic action required honesty, introspection, and sometimes vulnerability. The struggle, therefore, was not only about how to respond, but about how to navigate the tension between public perception and private reality. Advisors reported moments of intense reflection. Long nights spent reviewing correspondence, strategizing with legal teams, and consulting with trusted confidants were accompanied by private moments of personal anguish. Charles is, after all, human, susceptible to doubt, fear, and anger. The letter demanding £20 million forced him to confront the limits of control, the fragility of trust, and the complexity of human behavior within an institution designed to appear infallible. Every decision, every response, carried weight far beyond immediate consequences. At the same time, Charles had to consider legacy. The monarchy is not defined by a single moment, but by generations. Decisions made today would shape perceptions, relationships, and institutional norms for decades to come. A choice to concede, negotiate, or resist could establish precedents affecting the behavior of future family members, the management of internal disputes, and the perception of the monarchy's integrity. This awareness added another layer of pressure to an already overwhelming personal struggle. Adding complexity was the emotional interplay with Meghan herself. Publicly, she remained composed, charitable, and media-savvy, projecting an image of calm control. Privately, however, her influence over Harry and her ability to assert leverage created tension and uncertainty. Charles had to weigh his actions not only in terms of fairness, morality, and duty, but also in terms of psychological impact, family cohesion, and long-term relationships. The balance between authority and empathy, firmness and understanding, became a central, almost impossible, challenge. One of the most difficult aspects for Charles was reconciling anger and compassion. As a father, he wanted to protect his children, maintain family unity, and avoid unnecessary conflict. As king, he had to uphold the dignity of the monarchy, safeguard institutional trust, and ensure that no action undermined centuries of tradition. The tension between these roles created profound internal conflict. Every decision carried both personal and institutional consequences, and there was no way to separate the two entirely. Moreover, Charles's struggle was magnified by the media and public discourse. Social media platforms exploded with speculation, commentary, and judgment. Public opinion often oversimplifies complex situations, reducing nuanced dilemmas to black-and-white narratives. The pressure to manage perception, while simultaneously addressing personal betrayal, added another dimension to the challenge. The king had to act with discretion, resolve internal tensions, and prepare for the inevitable scrutiny that would follow any action taken in response to the demand. Yet amidst this personal struggle, Charles also demonstrated resilience. Advisors note that he approached the situation with a combination of pragmatism, strategic thinking, and emotional intelligence. Decisions were not made in haste, but after careful consideration of multiple perspectives, potential outcomes, and long-term implications. He recognized that while the £20 million demand was shocking, it also presented an opportunity to assert authority, establish boundaries, and navigate the crisis in a way that reinforced both familial and institutional integrity. In private moments, Charles reflected on the complexities of human relationships. Trust, loyalty, and love are fragile commodities, easily tested by ambition, pressure, and circumstance. The £20 million demand forced him to confront the reality that even the most carefully nurtured relationships can be disrupted by personal ambition and strategic maneuvering. Yet, despite the emotional toll, he remained committed to balancing empathy with authority, personal feelings with institutional responsibility, and short-term resolution with long-term consequence. The personal struggle was further compounded by historical context. Previous generations of the royal family faced scandals, betrayals, and challenges, yet few encountered a situation with the unique combination of personal leverage, financial demand, and public scrutiny that this crisis presented. Charles had to draw upon decades of experience, guidance from mentors, and his own instincts to navigate a path through uncharted territory. Every action, every decision, every conversation became a careful negotiation between emotion and duty. And as the palace navigated this storm, Charles understood that the struggle was far from over. Meghan's rise, influence, and alleged leverage represented not a temporary challenge, but a long-term test of his authority, judgment, and emotional fortitude. The £20 million demand was only the beginning. A catalyst for decisions that would define relationships, reputations, and the future of the monarchy itself. The moment the story of Meghan Markle's alleged demand, £20 million for secrecy, leaked, the world exploded. Headlines flashed across screens, social media erupted with speculation, and public debate ignited across continents. It was a media storm of unprecedented scale, one that no previous royal controversy could match. And yet, for all the noise, the full truth remained obscured behind the palace walls. The public saw fragments, rumors, and curated narratives. The palace, meanwhile, struggled to navigate the delicate balance between managing perception and protecting private realities. To grasp the magnitude, consider the speed and intensity of the coverage. Within hours, online platforms were flooded with articles, tweets, and videos dissecting every possible angle. Pundits debated motives, historians weighed in on precedent, and fans and critics alike formed instant opinions. Memes, infographics, and speculative timelines spread like wildfire, fueling conversation and amplifying the stakes. Suddenly, the palace's internal dilemma had become a global spectacle, and every word, every gesture, every decision would be scrutinized through the unforgiving lens of public attention. The media frenzy was both relentless and multifaceted. Some outlets framed Meghan as a manipulative figure, using her knowledge of private matters to extract wealth from the monarchy. Others portrayed her as a modernizer, someone asserting control over her narrative in an institution historically resistant to change. Headlines alternated between shock, scandal, and intrigue, creating a volatile mix that left the public captivated and the palace anxious. Social media commentary, in particular, amplified the story, with every post inviting likes, shares, and heated debates. Public perception became an ever-shifting landscape, one that the royal family had to navigate with extreme care. The psychological impact on King Charles and the family was profound. Even as they maintained public composure, the relentless scrutiny created a constant pressure. Advisors monitored media coverage, prepared statements, and developed contingency plans. Every misstep, no matter how small, had the potential to escalate the crisis. The palace had to operate with precision, managing the dual challenges of public perception and private decision-making. The media storm was not just a backdrop, it was a force shaping behavior, influencing choices, and increasing tension inside Buckingham Palace. Public reaction was equally polarizing. Millions debated the ethics of Meghan's alleged demand, the fairness of the monarchy's response, and the broader implications for royal tradition. Some sympathized with Meghan, viewing her as a woman asserting agency in a patriarchal institution. Others sided with Charles, emphasizing duty, loyalty, and the sanctity of the crown. Polls, online discussions, and international commentary revealed a divided audience, reflecting broader societal debates about power, privilege, and accountability. The palace, of course, had no control over these opinions, yet they shaped the context in which decisions had to be made. What made the media storm particularly intense was its unprecedented transparency, or at least the illusion of it. In previous decades, scandals were often managed quietly, shielded from public view. But the digital age had transformed the landscape. Every leak, every rumor, every speculation could be instantly amplified, reaching millions within minutes. The monarchy, steeped in tradition, suddenly faced a world in which secrecy was fragile, and information, whether true, partial, or distorted, had immediate consequences. The £20 million demand was not only a private challenge, it became a public spectacle, intensifying pressure and raising stakes in ways previously unimaginable. The role of social media cannot be overstated. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok allowed real-time commentary, creating a feedback loop where public opinion and media coverage fed into one another. Memes, threads, and viral posts dissected every aspect of the story. The amount of money demanded, the implications for family trust, the moral considerations, and even the fashion choices of Meghan and Charles. Each post contributed to a growing narrative, one that was simultaneously sensational, polarizing, and emotionally charged. For the royal family, this digital amplification meant that internal decisions were continuously reframed by public discourse. Amid the chaos, advisors faced difficult questions. Should the palace issue a statement? Should they ignore speculation and focus on internal deliberations? Could they mitigate damage without revealing sensitive details? Every option carried risk. Any public response could be interpreted as admission, defiance, or emotional reaction. Silence could be construed as weakness or guilt. The palace had to navigate a minefield, balancing the need to maintain dignity with the reality that global audiences were watching, analyzing, and reacting in real time. The human toll of this media storm was significant. King Charles, Prince William and other family members had to process both the personal betrayal implied by the alleged demand and the external scrutiny that magnified it. Sleep became fragmented, private conversations were tense, and every public engagement carried heightened anxiety. The palace staff, too, felt the strain, managing logistics, security, and communications in a high-pressure environment. The combination of emotional stress, institutional responsibility, and global attention created a pressure cooker that few could endure without careful support and extraordinary resilience. Yet the media storm also revealed opportunities. Public attention could be leveraged strategically, shaping narratives, highlighting positive initiatives, and reinforcing values of duty, service, and family. Advisors explored ways to control the flow of information, emphasizing charitable work, family appearances, and controlled interviews. The challenge was to navigate the storm without feeding the fire, to project calm and control while the underlying crisis remained unresolved. Every move was deliberate, every message carefully calibrated. The public, meanwhile, became participants in the drama, forming opinions, alliances, and judgments. Fan pages and critique threads sprang up overnight, reflecting the polarized views of global audiences. Some celebrated Meghan's boldness and independence, framing her actions as emblematic of modern empowerment. Others condemned her, framing the demand as audacious, opportunistic, or even exploitative. The feedback loop created a sense of urgency within the palace. Perception mattered, and in an age of instant communication, it could change in minutes. What made this storm even more complex was the intertwining of personal and public stakes. For the royal family, the crisis was not just about managing media coverage. It was about protecting internal relationships, maintaining trust, and safeguarding the monarchy's reputation for generations. Every decision had both a public dimension and a private dimension, and missteps in one area could have catastrophic consequences in the other. The £20 million demand, once revealed, became a lightning rod, drawing attention to vulnerabilities, secrets, and tensions that had long been hidden from public view. Amid the chaos, one fact became increasingly clear. The world was watching, but understanding was limited. The palace knew the stakes, the leverage, and the personal dimensions.